Hello again, folks. Today we're going to do a deep dive into some of the assets that I use to create the crew quarters in my ongoing project to completely model the interior of the original series Enterprise from the bridge all the way down to the lower decks. So today I'm using a blueprint from Jim Botaitis. I'll put a link to these blueprints in the description of the video. These are the blueprints that I use in my actual project, and I've sized and scaled these appropriately. I may make another video on how to import blueprints into Blender, but the focus today is going to be on using these assets that I've created to actually create a single deck in Blender. I created these assets to be easy to use, and these videos are intended to be a demonstration in some detail on how to build a deck using those assets. My asset library keeps growing and growing as I continue to work on this project. I plan to release all of these assets into the public domain free of charge by the end of the year. So what we're looking at here is deck 5 of Jim Botaitis' blueprints, the senior officer's quarters. And in fact, the commanding officer, Captain Kirk's quarters here. First officer, Spock, is right here. Then we have chief medical officer and other quarters in there. So one of the shortcut keys that I use quite often, I'm going to mention these shortcut keys throughout this video, is if you have an active object that's delineated by a highlighted line, by default that's orange. If you want to just zoom into that object or zoom out so you can see the entirety of that object, you hit the period key on the number pad, and that quickly gets you to that. First thing we're going to do here is work on some crew quarters. I'm just going to pick some random ones over here, and these two rings right here to work on. So what we do, let's get over to our asset browser, get to crew quarters, and we're going to start with a crew quarter divider, and I'm just going to drop this anywhere on this surface, and you see right away it disappeared. This is a bug that I'm hoping they fix soon in Blender. Instead of dropping that asset into my current collection, which I'm calling here movie making up here in the upper right, it dropped it into the assets hierarchy up here. So since I just dropped that asset in here, and if this happens to you, it disappears, here's what to do. Go over, don't click on anything in the scene collection listing here, and hit that numpad period to locate the asset in the hierarchy. So if I hit the numpad period now, there it is right there. So it's in the crew quarters asset folder. So all I have to do is left click and drag, scroll my mouse wheel and drag it down to the movie making collection, and there it pops up right there. It's not exactly where we want it yet, but it's in the scene. So we're going to zoom in on that, and you see there's not much to it yet, and that's intentional because I'm going to show you feature by feature everything that's included in this thing. First thing we're going to do is bring up the toolbar up here on the right, and we're going to set the location of this thing, which is indicated by the orange dot here, and that just happened to be where I dragged it out of the asset browser. We're going to set the location to 0, 0, and a Z of 0, X, Y, and Z of 0, 0, 0, and the rotation we're going to zero out as well. So whenever you drag something onto another object in Blender, it takes on the location and rotation information of the object that you dragged it to. So that's why we're resetting those items there. So I'm going to hide this toolbar here because it's just taking up space. The shortcut key for that is N. That toggles that on and off. And I'm going to shrink up our asset browser here since we don't need that right now. So here we are with this thing. In a previous video I made, I talked about how everything on the Stage 9 television set was located with polar coordinates. It was kind of set on a curving corridor, and that's why a lot of my tools to locate things are using polar coordinates. However, there are a lot of decks that are not radially based. For example, every deck in the secondary hull uses orthogonal dimensions. So I've got both capabilities built in here. So let's first of all locate this thing, and just arbitrarily I'm going to pick a spot to put it. So you can see this crew quarters right here. This feature here, this rectangle with the colored in smaller rectangle here, is that asset. So that makes it really nice to line up. And I'm going to pop over here to my modifier list here. So this is the main interface that you're going to be using over on the right to locate and change any settings of these assets. Now, this can be confusing over here. I'm going to make this a lot bigger right now. There's a lot of different types of items down the left-hand side here. What you're going to want to hit is that blue wrench, the modifiers. That includes everything you need to locate and complete the settings on each of these assets. I'm going to increase the size of that too. So the first thing we want to do with that thing, we've set the origin as 0, 0, 0, and that's important because all of the other location information I'm going to do parametrically within these menus. Right now, I've got everything collapsed here, and this is a new feature to Blender actually. In my previous video, all of these items were listed one after another with no hierarchy or separation, and it was becoming very difficult to start finding things the more and more choices and settings I added. So I've grouped everything into what I hope is logical groupings so it makes things easy to find. So the first thing we do, almost every asset has this location, orientation, and array grouping here that you can collapse and expand. And the first thing we can do is set a radius. So we're looking to put that asset from the center all the way out to this location. So that's going to be a radius. So you can click and drag that field, which I'm doing now, or you can just type in a value, 950. Okay, now we're getting close. And as soon as we get close, we can start changing the angle of that. Again, click and drag the angle until your angle lines up. Now we can hit the numpad period key to zoom in on that automatically. Now we can really start to tweak that in. So the radius, I'm going to put it halfway through that blue wall there, that radial wall. And then I'm going to change the angle to match that. Now if I hold the shift key down and click and scroll on that angle field, it will let me fine tune that. So that's right about where I want it. Okay, so we've got that placed. Now we just have to flesh it out a little bit here. So when doing that, I'm going to just work my way down this list of options here, starting with the geometry. So the geometry section includes showing the outer walls. That's simply, at the most bare bones version, that's just this transition piece right here. We can also toggle this left and right. You can, if we look at the top view here, go left and right, toggles that feature back and forth. The extension distance is variable, so if I increase that, we can go longer and shorter, so we can also change that extension angle at the end there. So that's what that's for. But typically my extension distance is between 140 and 150. And once we get the rest of the walls in here, we can tweak that as well. The other things we have in the geometry section is the office door cove. That's that right there. And if we expand that, anytime you see this little caret to the left here, we can expand that. And then we have the only option under here is the filler width. The filler is this piece here. And that's needed because the dimension can vary depending on where on the deck you are, of the distance between that door and the other wall. So if we look at the top, I want to adjust that filler width until I'm over touching that other wall right there. Now you've probably noticed already, this door opening does not align with what's on the blueprint here. And what I did when I created these assets, I stuck with the reference images that I used, that the door was directly adjacent to this centerpiece here. I don't have yet the capability to move that door into a different location. I may add that feature in the future. But for now, I just accept the fact that I'm not going to be directly matching what Jim has in his blueprints here. Okay, so that's the office door cove. Then we have the Lazy Susan, is what I call it. It's a cabinet or a dresser, but I call it a Lazy Susan because it can be, when we look in the settings, swiveled to be either some shelves at 120 degrees or something else at 240 degrees. Right now I just have it wide open at 240 degrees. And we go back to 0 and we get our standard doors. I don't have any sliders or settings yet to pull each of those drawers out. That's something I may add in the future as well. The last item we have under the geometry section is the circle screen. That is that screen right there. To reduce the burden on the processor, the default for that screen is just to show a dot mesh. You can change that to low poly rings, which does show the rings, but again, I have a low polygon count. As soon as you zoom into those, they look pretty raggedy there. And then you can go to high poly rings, which is the most graphics intensive, but for close-up shots, it's a good option. Okay, so that's the geometry section. So we have the pretty decent beginnings of that crew quarters there. I'm going to collapse that section and move on to the food replicator. So the food replicator also has quite a few settings, starting with the door. We can drag this slider to open and close that. Also, we have a light inside that we can control. We can also change the color of that door. You can pick any one of the pre-selected colors here. For now, we're going to make that gray. There's also an interior light color and intensity. So if we open that door, move the intensity, say up to 5. See, now we have it lit up inside. And you can pick a color from the color wheel there to light up anything that might be in there. If you want to turn it off, just put that light intensity to 0. I'm going to leave that on for now. So that's the door settings. Moving on down to the data card and other settings, we can include or exclude a data card in that slot right there. We can change the data card color. The replicator unit label, you can even change that. So if we want that to read anything else, 1, 2, 3, Baker, we can do that. We have flipped that label. Now the reason, and I include this flip button in quite a few of my assets, and the reason I do that is that sometimes you may want to mirror your assets over to another portion of the blueprint. So if we pop up back up here, so in this blueprint, and indeed in the 1973 Franz Joseph blueprints, you had a lot of symmetry going on. So once you locate an item, go back up to the location, orientation, and array. If we mirror up and down on the y-axis, we do have symmetry in that direction. So what happens when we mirror that, though, is that label gets reversed. You can see right there. So I would want to flip that label then so that it shows up properly there. Of course, if it shows up properly here, it will now show up reversed back here in our original one. So if you're making a video and you're going from one crew quarters to another one, you want to make sure that those settings are correct. The more you can do with arrays and replications and mirrors and offsets and things like that, the better for your file size. We'll come back here to the food replicator on our original asset here. The replicator contents, right now the only thing I have in there is a dinner tray, and I want to add some other things that we saw on the show into that as well, but that's the only thing I have in there now. Okay, the next category under the food replicator is the lights. We have our 4 lights across the bottom here. I've tried to get those colors right based on what we see on the TV show, but you can turn on and turn off each light individually. You can also change the color of those lights as well. Okay, I'm going to turn those off. Maybe we'll just leave one on. And that takes care of the food replicator. I'm going to shut that door. Now we'll move over to the safe. So that's just on the other side here. And this thing was not featured in very many episodes. I know the Tholian Webb, Spock and McCoy had to get into this safe when they thought, spoiler alert, that Kirk was dead. So Spock put in some kind of code up here, and I think I saw those lights in blue and yellow alternating, but not sure about that. But if we need to change those, we can. So somebody correct me if I need to get those different. We can turn the blue lights on and off, and the yellow lights on and off. I haven't added any other complexity beyond that. You can't really enter a code in here to open the door or anything like that. But you can manually slide the door open and close, just like with the food replicator. And just like the food replicator, you have an interior light, and you can control the color and intensity of that as well if you want to put that in. So that's the safe. Next we have decor. So this is something else I've been working quite a bit on, is creating all of these different assets of the objects that we saw on tabletops and shelves and other areas. If we click on decor, first thing that pops up are these wall hangings. Then we have various items that we can put on the center shelf here, up to 4 different items right now. So if you expand any one of these items, you get the same menu. We've got skulls, which I don't think we ever saw a skull in the crew quarters, but in McCoy's office, we had some shelf items and tabletop items that were skulls. So there's the first type: skull 1, skull 2, skull 3, and skull 4. Then we have totems. This one featured quite often in Captain Kirk's quarters. Totem 1, totem 2. That thing is huge, which is why I've included a scale on all of these. So if we make that like a 0.7 scale, that's a lot more suitable for that size shelf. And totem 3, get that up to 1.5 or so. That's another thing. I think that thing we might have seen in McCoy's quarters. But with each of these, you have sliders for X and Y position as well as orientation, so we can slide that back and forth, in and out. And we can also spin that around. I want to change that to get that to spin on its own center rather than some arbitrary rotational point. Then we have a other category. We have this thing that we saw in a few episodes. This right now is pretty rough looking. This was the best I could do with that model based on the reference images I could get. I have good reference images of this thing, but modeling it is another thing altogether. And then we have what I call Kirk's Hope Chest, which is that thing. It usually sat on the back wall near his desk. And this, I think I also have modeled a bit bigger than it really is. Oh, that's 1.5 scale. Um, change that back to 1, and that's typically what we saw that as. I don't have it to where the lid opens and closes yet, but that's on the list, but not a high priority right now. With these other items, then, if we wanted to, we have this chest on there. We just go to item 2. If we want to add a totem, we can do that. And where did he go? There he is. The location sliders can put any one of these to one side of that divider or the other. So you can do up to 4 items this way. The other option that you always have is to pop down here into decor. And I've got decor separated into floor, shelf items, tabletop items, wall items. And you can always just find something here and then drag it into the scene. So if we wanted a skull on here, we can just drag this right here, and you can see how it'll stick to the wall if you want to put it on the wall or on that tabletop there. And there it is right there. So that's another option if you want to do that. The only disadvantage to doing it that way is that now that's a separate item than this corridor divider. So if I move that divider anywhere, say with change the start angle of it, that skull right there is going to just stay put because it's a separate item controlled by separate parameters. If I want my assets to travel with my larger asset, then I use the in asset menus to add those things. All right, so that's our decor. If we collapse that, we can go to the corridor walls. If I click on that, initially nothing happens. I need to drill down into that. You see I've got radial, linear, door buzzer, and sign. Right now let's go with radial walls. And by radial, I mean that we're working with the polar coordinates, and these walls are going to form in a kind of an arch where they are. So we start out with 2 doorways here. And the first thing we have to do under radial is align the office door location to this cove feature. So this is just an angle. Again, click and drag that thing left and right until it's roughly centered on there. And then we have the bedroom door. The office door location right under that is the bedroom door location, and we can change the angle of that also to line that up with the blueprints. Before adding those walls to this asset, I had to have the walls separate, and it was a pain in the neck to get all those lined up. And then anytime if I had to move that centerpiece there, then I had to redo all of the walls as well. So that's why I've included the corridor walls into the center crew quarters divider asset. I also have tools to include the walls that fill in the gap here between those 2 doors. When you first turn those on, they're probably going to be out of place. So you have to first change the start angle of those things. I'm going to switch to a different mode here because this is really laggy. Okay. So the start angle here, and in these cases, I usually take a top-down view. So hit the number pad 7. There we go. And then zoom in on where these 2 are going to meet right here. So I'm going to go back to the filler wall start angle, hit my shift key down because I want to fine tune while I drag this number value left and right to get that right in. And you also can kind of control how wide that inlay feature is going to be that way. You see right there. We also have, now if that inlay feature is too wide in the rest of them, we've got this inlay end adjustment slider that we can tweak. So again, I hold down the shift key. First, click and drag that inlay end adjustment slider. I can make that wider or narrower. The reason that's even adjustable is because as we increase or decrease the radius of these walls, as we work towards the outer edges of the primary hull, everything scales. So I have to have the adjustment in there to uh, make those corrections. So now we have the filler walls in there. It doesn't quite reach the other doorway though. We've aligned the starting point with the first door. If we go again to the top and zoom in here, you can change the trim angle of these doors. So to the filler wall trim angle and change that number to make those bigger or narrower. You can also change the number of those panels. If we change that to 1, for example, maybe you only want a single wall panel in there. Change that to 1, and now you've got a single panel between those two doors. And it's just up to you whether, how big or small you want those panels to be. I think in this case, I like 2 better, and then we'll take that trim angle down as I get that close to where I want, and then I zoom in closer, and again shift and click to get a fine tune on that. It's okay if they overlap a little bit. And there's that section of the crew quarters. So I do want to cover the linear walls also. So if we're on a deck that has an orthogonal layout, just straight across, left to right, forward, backward, we would click on the linear walls. They're a lot more straightforward. We've got the office wall length. So the office is the area with the desk, so we can change the length of that wall. We can change the location of I believe that's the door location. Yep, we can line that up anywhere we want. Change the door color, change the inlay spacing, just like you can on a regular wall. And of course, every door has its door open and close slider, so we can control that as well. Same type of controls for the bedroom door side. Well, I haven't talked about this yet, the door buzzer. So there were 3 different kinds of door buzzers or doorbells that I could find anyway on the original series. We can turn that on or off. One of them was just kind of a green square with a black square inside. I think Mark of Gideon had that type of door buzzer on it. And there's a drop-down menu on the right here that we can select those different types. Another type is just a red rectangle. That doesn't show up in this material preview mode very well, but if we go to rendered mode, it shows up a little bit better. And then we had I think we even saw red and green buttons also. I might have those scaled a little bit small for this. They look minuscule relative to everything else, but I might decide to scale those up. So we have the door buzzer. We can change whether those are inboard or outboard. If we were working on the other side of the corridor, we'd want to swap those to inboard. And then we can also move those left and right and change the position. I've got a bug here. This bedroom door over here has got that mirrored instead of paralleled, so I need to fix that bug. Constantly fixing things. So we'll move it back over to the left, and finally we can add a sign. So if we click on sign, see a little black box here, and it's so small right now because there's no text defined in there. So if I want to type in all caps Captain James T. Kirk, hit enter, and it pops right in there. So these are fully parametric, fully programmable. You can make those say anything you want them to, and the size will adjust automatically. But I do have size controls here as well as location. So we can control the location of that sign left and right, up and down. I don't have yet the capability to put another sign on that same wall. I think I want to add that because a lot of times we saw not only a name but then a coordinate indication just below that, or initial sign. We can change the text size. Right now I've got it set at 2 inches. The text box width is used to control how much text appears on each line. So if I change that text box width to, say, 18 inches, now we've got everything on a single line. If I change it to 3 inches, that puts each different word on its own line. So you have to just adjust that until you find a text box width that fills out that text in the way you want. We have a color choice here, so some of the signs we saw in the crew quarters were blue, but all of the name signs I think were black. And then of course you can make custom colors as well with an RGB tool. I also have a width adjustment and height adjustment. So aside from the text box width, that mainly controls how your text flows within the space. If I want some extra margin around the sides and top and bottom of, let me just show you what the 0 setting is. So when those are set to 0, it crops the size of that sign in pretty close there. Let's say we want to put some extra. We can make that sign wider or narrower without affecting how that text flows in there, and also the height adjustment, higher and lower. So with all of those settings, hopefully you can make signs that are exactly what you're looking for. So that's the sign. The last thing that I want to cover, and I'm going to turn down the lights here a little bit virtually. I'm going to turn off the sun. Oh, I really turned off the lights. Let's see. Let's turn that back on. Let's set that down to a strength of 1. So make it pretty dim in here, just so we can see the lighting effects. So out of all of these other menu choices here, if we collapse everything, so the last thing I have on here is the lights. If I turn those on, you don't see much going on right now. You could see a little blip of something show up right here. That checkbox should be called hide, because when I check it, it hides it. When I uncheck it, it shows it. It's another thing I need to fix. So right now, if I take a look at this, it's just a simple square right here, and that's actually a light emitting element. If I turn up the brightness, say to 50, you'll see that, and it's shining a light in the color I've got selected here. Let's just go with white right now. Can't see much light over on the other side because right now it's pretty dim, but you can change the shape and the size of this thing. If I want to go with a circle and scale that up to, say, 25, we can do that. Of course, the brightness increases as you increase the size of that as well. So you have controls on this light. I'm going to zero everything out here that are pretty much the same kind of controls as the location, orientation, and array. The Z offset is important. Since these walls are 10 feet tall, 120 inches, I put all my lights at or around 118 inches from the floor. So what I can do here is, what I would do is make sure that light is visible so I can see what I'm doing here. I've got a circle light here, and I want to offset that in the X direction, and I'll move it in the Y direction, and then I will give it a linear array, a Y count of, let's say, 140, 150, and that moves it over into the bedroom as well. Now I can change these angles also to point to one area or another, but right now let's just point them straight down. Now if I hide these, we still get the light but the elements themselves are not visible. And then we can make this light just about any color we want. If you go too extreme, it's pretty garish. So all you need is just a slight tinge of color. And the trick to that is, if you know the color you want, click on this color bar that brings up the RGB tool. And say we want just a slight hint of blue. We go ahead and hit blue. And then if we go to this HSV portion of the tool over here, that's hue, saturation, and value. And we desaturate that. And as we do that, it gets closer and closer to white. So you get more of a subtle effect. And you can get just the right amount of color in there that you want. So that's the lights off and on. Makes quite a big difference there. Let's change back to our radial walls. Let's see here. There we are. All right, so let's say I want to continue the development of this crew quarters here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to mirror that again. Let's say I wanted to build out this whole deck. So we already know it's symmetrical about the y-axis. And the question is, are there any other dividers here that might benefit from an array? So what I could do, for example, is change my resolution to increase that to say 2 or 3 and change the sweep angle. So if I identified some other dividers here that would benefit from that, I could use that kind of a tool to line those up. Doesn't look like I have any though, so what I would do in this case, I've got 2 other dividers in this portion of the ring. So I would copy this asset right here and hold down Alt and D, which makes a copy, and just right click to drop it right in the exact spot as the original. And then I would change the start angle of this copied asset. So there's that. So you see it copied not only the asset itself, but also all the settings that went along with that, including the lighting, the orientation, everything. Now with this one, we've got the cabinet on the opposite side. So I go into the geometry settings and I click on the left, and then that bumps that to the left. Now that also kind of messed up our filler walls here. I can leave those settings exactly the same. The only thing I need to change in the filler walls is the start angle, filler wall start angle. So we tweak that. That looks good. And now I've got that set up right there. Now what I can do is pattern this one with an array to make this divider here. So I'm going to give that a resolution of 2. We want a sweep angle of, I don't know, let's start with 10 degrees and go from there, right about there. So you see now we have a good portion of the crew quarters on that ring started, and we've used our array tools to replicate a lot of that. We really only have 2 assets down at this point, this one and this one. Now before we create the actual rooms in here, I want to create some other filler walls on this. Oh, here we've hit another bug. So we've done a radial array on this divider. You see it's got the corridor walls here, and I don't know why this happens, but if we use a radial array to duplicate that, it makes the walls just disappear. Not sure why yet, so it's on my list of things to fix. So we're going to change this back to 1. We're going to copy that sweep angle and put it down into this angle 1 modifier down here. and then that makes that copy and retains the walls. Okay, let's bring in just a circular wall. We got this parametric wall circular that I can drop in here. Now in that case, it did drop it in the right folder. So that bug I mentioned earlier is a bit hit or miss. Hit the N key to bring up my control panel up here. We're going to put that as 0, 0, 0, and rotation also zeroed out. Now before we move this out into position, I'm going to take a look at my wall placement here to see if it lines up with Jim's blueprints, and it's a bit off. So I'm going to go back to this asset. We're going to go into the geometry and change the extension distance so that it matches up better. It's a little subtle to see, so I'm going to zoom in on that a bit more. Again, the extension distance was out a bit too far, but by bringing that in, I can line that up quite a bit better. Okay, and I'm going to copy that number, that 139.17 number that's right there. Not paste, silly, copy. And I'm going to paste that same number in here so they all match up now. So now if I copy that and make some more, all of them will, again, they carry over the same parameters. They'll all have the proper radius there. So this next portion, we'll fill in the space in between here and maybe fill in some of the other spaces as well. So this piece is at a radius of 1182 and change, and the extension was roughly 140. So if we type in a radius here of 1182 plus 140, it should get us in the ballpark. Not quite. So we need to extend that out a little bit more. Now the thing with these circular walls, that as you increase the radius, they get wider and wider because the nature of these things, the width of the wall is controlled not with a distance but with an angle. So we take that trim angle of the wall geometry down and then come back up here, increase the radius until we're lined up with the rest of that geometry there. Now before we go too much further, let's go into the geometry section of this asset and change that trim angle, or change the inlay angle here. So inlay is something that you can turn on and off with these things. So if we uncheck that, it's just got those wall segments without any inlay in there. We put that check mark back on, and there we have that. Then we can change the width adjustment of that inlay, and now it's overlapping with my other geometry, so that's I'm going to go to wireframe mode just so I can see. Change that inlay right about there. And the reason that whole wall was moving, that inlay actually changes the overall length of the wall, so it makes adjustments all the way down the line. All right, so back to the location orientation. I'm going to modify the start angle until that lines up with that center divider. And again, zoom in to get a good alignment there. I'm going to tweak the radius outward until that lines up. And that's good enough. Now what we also have in this circular wall array is some other features that make it hopefully easy to use. I'm going to duplicate this right now just for demonstration purposes and work on a copy of this over here. So a couple of important features of this thing is the start angle from end of wall and also end to end array. Now let's take our resolution, or the number of instances, down to 1, just so we're looking at that. I'm going to isolate this thing. Now if we start increasing our resolution here with these two boxes unchecked, the start angle from end of wall and end to end array, it starts making duplicates of that between the original location and the sweep angle. So I can change the sweep angle And what I used to do is have just these types of controls, so I could change the sweep angle and line those up. But then if I change the width of the wall with the trim angle, everything stayed right where it was, and I either got gaps or overlap using that method. So that's why I created these other two settings, primarily this end-to-end array setting. So if I change this to an end-to-end array, click on that, and they all snap together like they're supposed to. If I change the trim angle here, they all adjust themselves automatically to that new trim angle. Now you can see it's getting wider and narrower on both sides of this initial wall, and then just stacking everything on after that. That's why I have the start angle from the end of the wall. If I click on that, see, it shifted those a bit. So right now everything's going off of the center of this first wall segment. If we keep an eye on that point, click start angle from the end of the wall, it shifts that over to where the center used to be. Now if I change the wall trim angle, that first location stays right where it's at, which is a huge time saver if you consider that we need to locate these walls, we locate them at an anchor spot, and then we adjust everything from there. We decide how many panels we want. If we take our count down to 1, so do we want 3 panels in between there or 4? So I think 3 would be fine, so we set our count to 3. Make sure we're starting the angle from the end of the wall, end-to-end array. I'm going to adjust that starting point again. And I'm going to adjust my trim angle under wall geometry to increase that until I just touch right there. Now I've got those things perfectly laid in there. Without those two modes, this would be take a long time with trial and error to get all of those to fit just right. Or the other alternative would be to lay each segment in there individually, which I don't want to do. So once we get to deck 7, you get a fairly large radius, and it is so nice just to be able to drop your wall in there, increase your resolution to practically an entire round corridor in there on a very large deck. All right, I'm going to leave that there for now. So we've got these here. Now that I'm looking at this, those look a bit fat, so I'm going to increase that count to 4, which just tacks another one on the very end. So we're going to have to change our trim angle again to get all of those adjusted. And that way we only take a few seconds to do that instead of 5 minutes. Okay, I like that proportionality a lot better. So there we go. We don't need this trim on the inside. So I'm going to go to the trim, but I want trim on the outside but not the inside. So we can turn off the inboard panel. And just like with everything else, that color, we can pick from a drop-down list of common colors, or we can make a custom color if we want to do that. All right, so that's that filler wall right there. You finish out the rest of those in the same way. Now I'm going to drop in what I call a crew quarters back wall. And there's that thing. So the nice thing about this is once I have a component of a crew quarters starting to lay out here, I look at that radius number. In the case of the primary hull, where everything's circular around the center point, I either remember, copy that radius number. I go over to my new asset, give it that same radius, and it goes right out to where it's supposed to be. So in this case, I'm going to use one of these things for the desk area or office area, one of them for the bedroom area, and a third for the bathroom. So I'm going to rotate this around with a start angle adjustment. I'm going to center it between this blue wall here and this lavender portion of that wall there, and then adjust the width to overlap into both of those areas. And again, overlap is fine. And we see how that lines up there then. And that trim is designed to line up right there as well. I'm getting a shadow from that light object, which I don't like. That fortunately does not show up in the rendered mode, but it's kind of annoying that it shows up in the material preview mode. So this thing has a lot of settings too. With the geometry, mainly it's just the width. I've got a trim height setting, which adjusts the height of this trim piece here, so you can get it lined up exactly where you want it relative to this arch that comes over from that center beam. And then I've got a back wall feature, which backing wall, which normally you don't need. So it leaves this kind of ugly back part of this thing, but that's usually covered by another asset that's directly on the other side of it, or a corridor wall. The case where you might need that backing wall is if these crew quarters back up into another wall on this side that is not crew quarters or is otherwise uncovered, and that just gives you the option to put a feature there, a plain blank feature there. But in this case, we don't need it. Now might be a good time to talk about how we duplicate this asset also to create that inboard ring. So again, we highlight the asset, Alt-D to copy that. Right click, drop it in the same place, and all we have to do now under the location orientation array settings, check inboard outboard, and that flips that to the inboard side. So we've got that. Now we've also got that thing, the cabinet on the other side, so we have to flip that left and right, and then we change the start angle. So with just a very little work, we've made the inner ring version of that. We need to adjust our doors and our filler walls because now this is a different radius here than this one, and the asset automatically adjusts these walls to the proper radius, but it doesn't move those walls left and right necessarily to fit properly. So we can change those. Corridor walls, radial, office door location. Right about there. And then the filler walls, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. We can adjust those to their proper location as well. All right, so that one's all set. And remember, we just did that by copying this asset, flipping it around, and making some tweaks and adjustments there. And you see it's mirrored that one also, since the original asset was mirrored. It copied all of those settings. And the one thing here, this is a good demonstration of why this asset needed a very long filler wall here. This one, you would see that would jut into the adjacent room there, so we would need to tweak this one down. And there's that. Okay. So back to this back wall here that we were working on. So we got the geometry width setting, the trim height setting. We talked about the backing wall. We can also add a floor in here. And with this, we can change the length of the floor, the color, go to gray. I think the crew quarters carpets were green. We can reduce the length of that thing. And the reason I typically don't use these built-in floors anymore, it seemed like they would be really nice to have. But you see this floor, it's just a simple rectangle that comes off of that back wall there. I did put in some different settings to change the taper of the floor and starting width and the offset. But then as soon as I put in this next area here and create a floor there, I'm stuck with the proposition of trying to line up the edges of those two floors, and it's just too much fine-tuning for me. But anyway, I'm leaving that floor feature in there. Somebody might find it useful. It's really good for orthogonal walls because they just go straight across, back and forth, up and down, and that rectangular floor section works out well there. But on these radial designs, everything is a wedge, and that brings in a lot of complications there. So we're going to turn off that floor for now and focus back on this thing. We do have furniture here. You have a choice between, well, the wall hanger and the no wall hanging. I want to make that a drop-down selection where you can pick what kind of wall art you might want there, adjust the position of it up, down, left, and right, and have that available. So the furniture, we have a selection from, we can put a bed in here. I remodeled that bed. So it's a little bit better than it was. Before it was just a big old block. So I put a blanket in there and a pillow. I think these could still use some tweaks and improvements, but there they are now. I tried the best as possible to match the material. We can have a bed. We can have a desk. We have a bathroom. So we got a toilet and a sink, and we need to push that thing with an X offset to see the tub. You can see that there. And what's next? Oh, an office. So round table with some chairs that we can set up there. Or we could just say none. We don't have anything. Now that office is interesting. We did see in various shots of cruise quarters different types of desks and things in there depending on whose quarters we were looking at. Also on deck 5 here, see Kirk and Spock have not only bathroom, bedroom, desk, but also an adjacent office, which makes a lot of sense to me, so I'm glad Jim included that in his blueprints. But for this one, right now, we're going to make it a desk. And take our X offset back down to 0 to bring that back. And then we can change the Y offset also and move that closer to or further away from the center. We can flip that desk around either way. So you can see the way Jim has it drawn in here. It's kind of more that angle. Now sometimes these lines don't line up exactly, but those are just details at the scale Jim's drawing at. He's done a super job of getting all these things accurately portrayed here. So there's our desk. We can collapse the furniture. No, I need that expanded. I can add up to 2 chairs. Chair 1, we can select the type of chair, Burke Standard, the high top, or I've even got a bar stool now that I didn't have before. I don't think we'll see those in the crew quarters though. Color is black, orange, which matches the fabric of the bed. And also we saw a blue one from time to time. Right now we'll go with black. We change the orientation of that and the location as well. We had a second chair. We've had the same kind of controls there. We also have the shelf items and then desk items as well. Tabletop viewer. We can, when I think I made a first video of this thing, I had some of these settings, but not all of them. We can change the location and orientation of that. I'm going to have more choices here, but right now the choices on the screen is just white on or white off. But I want to add a whole bunch of pictures to that we saw on the original series, so we could put anything we want right in there. Can also flip these switches off and on the right side and the left side. and then include a data card or not, and choose the color of that data card. We also have a communication cluster. Let's see, that's right, this is facing the right direction. Let's expand that out and see what our settings are for that. So we can turn that communicator off or on. We can of course control the location of that, X and Y, and the orientation. We can include a white button, data card. I don't know if we ever saw a data card in a slot on a table in the crew quarters. We saw that kind of thing in the briefing room, but not sure we saw that in the crew quarters desk. And add a big red button if we need it. That I don't think we ever saw in the crew quarters, but again, in other settings, it was part of this communication cluster. And then a rocker switch panel. One thing I've added here since the last video I made is you now have direct control over the switch settings. So not only, again, location orientation as usual, but if you expand the switch settings, you can change the color of each of these rocker switches. And these I've decided just to leave as standard colors. They were very specific colors for each of those switches. And you can switch each of them on or off. So that takes care of the COM cluster, and the nice thing is that if you want to hide all of that, you don't have to hide each individual element of it. You just come up to the top part of the hierarchy and click that on or off, and it shows that or hides it. And again, you have lights just as you do in the other asset that I showed. So let's go back to rendered mode, and we can see how that light affects that entire room. Let's make the bedroom. Take this asset, copy it with Alt-D, change the start angle, and center it between those two walls there. Going to narrow that down just a little bit under geometry width. Okay. Then we're just going to change the furniture from a desk to a bed. And there we have it. And again, since we copied this one from the left from the office area, it also copied all the settings, including the artwork and the two chairs. So I'm going to hide the chairs to give us just that. Now, before we put in this bathroom here, I'm going to put in another few walls. We haven't talked about linear walls a little bit in my first video. We're going to talk about them again some more here because I've got some new features with those too. Let's go into walls and beams. We've got parametric wall linear, and we're going to drop that in there. Zero everything out. And there it is right there. Now it's already got, looks like a radius applied to it. Yeah, 106 and change. But what I know I can do, again, is click on this original asset here, look at its radius value, copy that, and put that radius value right in there. Now the start angle is set to 180, which is why it's at the 9 o'clock position. But if I change that to 0, it'll bring it right over to the 3 o'clock position. What I want to do with that is change the start angle of that to line up right there. And before I go making copies of this or doing too much else, I want to tweak the length of that thing to stop right about the halfway point with those radial walls. That's under wall geometry. And change the length of that. Okay, so with this wall, I'm going to isolate that just to focus on this and show some of the features here. It's got the same parameters for location, orientation, and array, and maybe it's time to go into those in a little more depth. I think I've already showed off the start angle, resolution, and sweep angle array. We can change the orientation of the wall, which is different from the start angle because the start angle always is measured from the center point here. So if I change that start angle, let's say right now it's at 19 degrees, if you can see it's sweeping from a center point right there. The orientation changes the angle from the starting point of the wall itself. So that's how those two are different. We're going to set that at 0. Start angle was 19.05. And again, just the standard radial kind of array. You give it a number of instances that you want, which I call the resolution. You give it a sweep angle. That's the angle between the original wall and the last wall in the series. So if you change that, it distributes that number of walls evenly between those 2 points. We can offset the wall left, right, forward, backward. We can make it inboard, outboard. We can also have orthogonal arrays. So if I give it a count of, let's say 2, let's say 20, and give it an X offset of 200. So every 200, 250 inches, it creates another instance of that wall till it gets to 20. Let's bring that down to 5. Same thing with Y. If I go with a 5 and offset that to 75 inches, it's got that. And the same thing with the Z. So that's a very powerful tool once you have a single asset to replicate those things, assuming each one of those that you want to replicate is going to be exactly identical without using extra memory or resources. All right, we'll bring those back down. And the mirror is just very simple. Mirror X, mirror Y. If you mirror both, you get symmetry in both directions there. Now this angles, these angles down here, I briefly mentioned in the previous video, but never really went into it before. And I found that with the unique symmetry in the primary hull, I needed these types of array tools in order to give me the symmetry I wanted. So the first angle gives you an effect very similar to what the start angle and increasing the resolution to 2 and the sweep angle gives you. So if I start from 0, if that thing's anything other than 0, it immediately makes a copy and rotates that around. Now angle 2 builds on angle 1, and it takes both of those walls and separates them by another angle. So the effect is this first copy is 6.6 degrees away from the initial, and these next 2 are 32.5 degrees away from the first 2. Likewise, angle 3 builds on those first 2. So if I start implementing that up, it just takes, actually it builds on just the angle 2 there. It makes another copy. So if I have another point of symmetry where there's a different angle between the first group than there is first group and the second group, then the second group and the third group, I can change that with angle 3. And using this method, you could just use the blueprint as reference and save quite a bit of resources by using arrays as opposed to dropping in asset after asset over and over again. So the wall geometry here, we've got length, we have height, which I don't think we had before. Some of the decks span two deck heights, like in particular engineering and some of the rec rooms, so I can make that quite a bit higher if I want. Can't adjust the trim yet, but that's coming. Typical height is 120, 10 feet. The color of the wall, of course, the floor skirting you can turn on or off. Right now it's off. pop that on, and we see that inset black floor skirting. Show input geometry is for developmental use only. It's the simple geometry that that asset is built on. In that case, just a plane. The wall trim, again, I think we've talked about before. We're going to have the upper trim there or not on both sides, and we've got a color picker just like all of the other color pickers, and then the crew quarters trim, which is that. Corner cylinders, this is a new one. When you have two walls approaching each other or contacting each other at a corner, often in the show what you saw was a cylinder like that. I've got it 9 inches in diameter. I had them 10, but somebody corrected me and said they were closer to 9, so I made these 9 inches. So the idea here is I've got another wall coming off from the, say, the right here, and I can finish that off with a cylinder. I used to put the cylinders in as a separate component, but having them travel with the wall itself is so nice. I can change that from inboard to outboard depending on the other wall's geometry, and we can put a cylinder at the start of that wall and the end of that wall and control each one of those individually. The door, not too much to say here. You can change it from a single door to a double door. So a single door, of course, will slide. It'll slide in either direction depending on which way you want that to go. The 0 location is a fully closed door. If we change that to a double door, you don't see anything change right away until you start to open it, and then it opens from the center. I also put in the option for an opening only if you don't want to have a door but just have an opening. I think we saw that in some of the sick bay areas. Change the door location, of course. The width, thickness of the door, the height of the door is all adjustable. The color, of course. And then the opening cutout, you can even change the color of that cutout. Typically, I leave that the same color as the wall itself. The inlay, there's no width adjustment on this inlay because of an orthogonal wall. It doesn't have that same problem that the circular walls do, but you can change the spacing from the door, the spacing of every piece of inlay after that initial spacing, and then how many sections of inlay you actually have. One thing new this time around is this vertical inlay side setting. So right now it's set to both sides. You see that inlay is on both sides. Sometimes you may want to have inlay on one side but not another for whatever reason, depending on what two rooms are adjacent to each other. So we can say that it's the outboard side only. So we got there but not there. The inboard side only. So we got it there but not there. Or both sides. Got a doorbell that popped in there. Oh, let's just turn that off. Now, if we do have a taller wall, like say again in engineering, let's change that wall geometry height to 2 decks high. 120 inches plus 120 inches plus 27 inches for the deck height. And sometimes you might see, like again, I think in their engineering, horizontal inlay. So I've got a button for that. It's just one strip of inlay at this point, but you can change the height of it, and you can tell the vertical inlay to stop at that horizontal inlay height. So if we check that box, the vertical inlay comes from the floor up to that horizontal inlay and stops. And that again has both sides outboard or inboard only controls like we had on the vertical inlay. And the top level inlay button turns all of the inlay off or on. We've got a red alert. You see nothing happened there until we told it which side to go on. So I'll click on outboard, say inboard, outboard, or both. If we turn turn on shaded view because this doesn't really look good in material preview. It's a little bit better in shaded view. I'm still working on getting this so that it will reflect some light. So sometimes we saw some slight reflection on this wavy surface here, and still trying to nail down the look of that. But we can turn the red alert on or off. I don't have a blinking mode yet. Blinking mode, though, does require the animation to be running in the background. That takes up a lot of CPU, so don't have that in there yet. So let's bring this down again to the standard height. We have cabinets also. So again, in the crew quarters, sometimes if you have crew quarters with double occupancy, you need not only that initial crew quarters divider cabinet, but another wall with a cabinet as well. And these things are individually selectable, inboard, outboard, and each one has their own X offset, Y offset, and the Lazy Susan swivel. There's also a button to scale them down if you want a smaller version. Sometimes I put one of these into a bathroom and there's not a whole lot of room in there, so it just scales down to, say, like 3/4 size or so. So that's the cabinets. We've got a ventilation system. This was featured in, I think, the episode Obsession. So if I turn that on, let me crank up the sun a little bit here. So we got the ventilation system, which again we saw in Obsession. That's this thing. Now you see, you might have seen earlier in some of the tables that they looked awfully chiseled and had sharp corners, and that is an intentional thing. So I intentionally leave these things low poly and low polygon count when I'm working with them. But if we switch to camera mode and train a camera on that, where are we? Over here? And I have depth of field turned on, so I'm going to turn that off. Okay, let's get really tight in there. So when we render this, it renders at a higher polygon count than what we see in the working viewport. So there is a really nicely rounded off knob there. And there's a lot of components I've got set up that way so that, again, it's to reduce the intensity on the GPU while you're working with the files, but that your final renders will come out looking really good. Okay, but anyway, here's the ventilation feature. With this, you can make that inboard and outboard as well, or both. We can change the location of it. Let's see, horizontal, vertical. So sometimes maybe in a bathroom, for example, you might want up that high up on the wall, but you wouldn't want the controls up that high. So we have the option to include the screen only, the control panel only. So we can turn off the control panel and just have the ventilation there. We can turn off the screen and just have the control panel. So you can change that up and down, left and right, screen only, control panel only. Looking closer at the control panel, we've got the individual switch positions we can control. We can turn on the light behind this knob here, which maybe go to rendered preview to see that. It's very subtle. I'll need to brighten that up a bit. And then the bypass switch also, we can turn off and on. That's the ventilation system. Just as with one of the other crew quarters assets here, I've got a floor included in this that you can control which side that floor is on, the material type. You could even make a wood floor if you wanted to. Mirror floor. Engineering floor. We'll change that back to carpet and change the length of it. We change the width at the bottom, at the top, the taper symmetry, and all of that good stuff. But again, as I explained earlier, you usually don't use the floors that are attached to the assets themselves, but sometimes they might come in handy. Here's an interesting one. Sometimes you just need a hole in the wall, so I've got a feature to put a hole in the wall. sometimes, like in sick bay, for example, there's some shelving behind some ribbed glass that has kind of a reddish light applied to it, and I use the hole in the wall in order to make that feature. So very simple controls here. If the depth is 12 inches or more, that hole's going to go through the whole wall because the walls are 12 inches thick. If we make that something less, it didn't disappear, but it's just 5 inches from this wall, this side here. So you can control whether that wall is inboard or outboard. It's got a chamfer built into it, which is nice if there's some kind of like in the sick bay exam room, there's a panel with a bunch of lights on it that is a medical status panel, and it has chamfered edges. Same thing with the engineering panel as well. So we can change the depth of that hole so it can go all the way through or be very shallow or anywhere in between. The bevel size, we can also change that as well. And the material. So the cutout material, if we want to make that black, we can do that, or just about any other color that you want. And then finally, this last one is called Boolean trim, and I don't know why they call it Boolean trim. It's just because it's a kind of either a union or a subtraction or a difference or an intersection between two sets of geometry. In this case, I'm subtracting one piece of geometry from another. So why would anybody ever want to do that? I'll explain the use case here. Let's change that wall trim angle to 90. So we can change the angle, and it's kind of hard to see what's going on here. So I've got another switch to say show Boolean geometry. So when you click that on, and that's not intended to be left on, but when you click it on, it shows the shape that is being used to cut out your primary shape. So you can use that to better anticipate what's going to happen and how it's going to cut that. Now, the outer walls of the primary hull, particularly on decks 6 and 7, the primary hull has this angle to it. And the wall that goes directly against that edge of the primary hull, if we left them squared off, it would line up at the top of that primary hull, but at the bottom you'd see this corner poking out on the exterior of the ship. So there's all kinds of curved areas of the ship on the secondary hull on decks 2 and 3, and you can use this feature and the angle to trim those walls as needed as they get out towards the outer edges of the hull. You also change the color of that cut as well. I've never had a reason to do that, but you can do it. So that is our straight wall. Now let's put it to use. Where'd it go? There it is, still lined up with the where we left it. In this case, I'm just going to jump right to the wall trim, set both sides to crew quarters. See that they line up pretty well with this horizontal trim here. When they don't, you can just adjust that horizontal trim up and down. So we've got in this case, we have two offices from two different crewmen, so we don't need that door at all. I'm going to get rid of that door. You see the inlay takes its cues from the door location and width. If we change the width of the door, the inlay moves by the appropriate amount to preserve our setting of the first inlay being 6 inches away from the door, whatever we decide it to be. So even without a door, if we change the width of the door, the inlay will follow suit. So there's that. I want to duplicate this, and with Alt-D, going to the next one without a door is up here for the bathrooms, and I'm going to sweep that around there. Duplicate it one more time with Alt-D, right-click, drop it right back where it was, change the start angle. Now this one does have a door. I'm going to pop down to the door section. It's a single door. It is not only the opening, we want it to be a light gray color, and we're going to move the location to line up where it's indicated on the blueprint. Is that wide enough? Not quite wide enough. I'm going to change that to 32 inches wide. There we go. Okay, so there's that door. Now we have our bathroom. So again, all of this geometry comes out of another copy of one of these back walls here. So we'll go up top again, Alt D to copy, right click, drop in place, go to our start angle and get that roughly centered between these two walls here, and go down to change the width under the geometry category. All right, we've got that width set. Now we don't need the bed anymore. Let me collapse some things here. We need to change the furniture from a bed to a bathroom. And we do not need a wall hanging in that bathroom. In fact, arguably, let's just have it in the bedroom. All right, now here, you can see things aren't aligned very well at all, but that's intentional because each one of these rooms is a little bit different. You can see this one's wider down here, and it's actually got 2 sinks, 2 toilets, and there's all different kinds of configurations there. So I made that flexible. So with the furniture, we have probably the first thing to do is to move that tub into place right there and change the Y offset to slide it up against the wall. And you see, since there's a relative angle between the back wall and this side wall here, we need to account for that. So we're going to move the bathtub up pretty close to the wall and then change the orientation of this whole set of features here to line that up with the wall. I wish there were a better way to do that other than manually, but there it is. So without changing anything else, we've got the toilet, we've got the sink, we have the bathtub in there. There's a shower also. I think that's a shower that goes right in there. Now with the bathroom, we've got some other settings with the sink as well. Let me put in some more wall here. I'm just going to copy this section of wall we had. Alt D, right click, and change the start angle there. Okay, now we got the proper corridor that's building up here. And we also have our interior wall for the bathroom. So if we wanted to, say, move that toilet up against this outer wall here, we can go into our settings here, look specifically under bathroom settings. We can include the tub or not. We can increase the number of toilets to a ridiculous amount. We only have one in here though. We've got the offset for the toilet in one direction and also the other direction. We can orient that toilet that way, so we can back it up against this wall, set that like that, and then we can even flip it so that our little privacy wall here goes to the other side. So quite a few settings that can be controlled in there. And then with the sink, you can also have a number of sinks with mirrors also. Okay, that is a full crew quarters set created on top of Jim Botaitis' blueprints. I hope you found this interesting. I'm going to be doing some more deep dives into a lot of the other assets that will focus on not only the assets themselves, but a lot of the settings and lighting, different tweaks you can make, and how you can build just about anything in here that you'd want to build that you might find inside of a original series starship. That's all for today. You take care, and I'll talk to you again soon.